We're a non-governmental organization in the Guyanese context. It's an organization that, as it says, it's non-governmental. It does not mean you do not have government partners, but it is more of a civil society organization. And that organization usually provides services, something that is close to the heart of that agency. Most non-governmental organizations that I'm affiliated with and have worked with in Guyana have risen from a history of something that was near and dear to their heart. And I want to emphasize paying for it.
Yes.
Everybody think NGO is supposed to work for free. No, we got bills, we have families, we have needs like every other person that is non-NGO sector.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Development Space podcast. On this episode, Grassroots Development, the NGO Starter Kit, we will be delving into the world of non-governmental organizations. At the end of this podcast, you will learn inter alia what are NGOs, the role that they play in development at the community and at the national level, as well as how they sustain themselves. I am your host, Sidney Nelson, and to delve into this conversation, I'm joined by special invited guest, Mr. Simone Sills. Ms. Sills is the Executive Director of the National Coordinating Coalition. Welcome to the Development Space.
Thank you, Sydney. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. So, Mr. Sills, tell us a bit about your work. What is the National Coordinating Coalition and what does it do?
Thank you, Sydney. We do a lot. We will be here for another 2 weekends if I'm to see all that we do. But I'll do my very best to say this in a very succinct way. So the NGO National Coordinating Coalition, it is a non-governmental organization. As indicated in its name, it is a coordinating agency. We have 40 members and growing. Our role as the NGO National Coordinating Coalition, or as the NSCC, we formally call it.
Okay.
Our role is as an implementer as well as what we do for our partners. For our partners, we do shared advocacy, resource mobilization, and looking at where and how we serve the audiences we serve the best. And as an implementer, we work with national, international, and local partners to address various social issues in our communities.
Excellent. Who are some of the partners that you have worked with in terms of implementing projects?
Yeah. Well, lots of our members are very well-known names in Guyana and out of the local NGOs. For some of our international partners, we worked with USAID, we worked with IDB, we worked with DFID, we worked with some of the UN agencies, we worked with Global Fund, and across many of the public sector agencies we also partner with. One of our key partners has always been the Ministry of Health through the varying departments, whether that is the TV department, malaria department, but they have been one of our main partners over the years, but we've also partnered with other governmental agencies as well.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned in your introduction that the NCC is an NGO itself.
Yeah.
And you work with somewhat over 40 NGOs.
Correct.
So with that backdrop, it is safe to say that you have a good understanding of what an NGO is. So in your own words, what would you say is a non-governmental organization? You mentioned that your organization, it works with social issues, and that is something that pops up. But in your own words, what is an NGO?
We're a non-governmental organization in the Guyanese context. It's an organization that, as it says, it's non-governmental. It does not mean you do not have government partners, but it is more of a civil society organization. And that organization usually provides services, something that is close to the heart of that agency. Most non-governmental organizations that I'm affiliated with and have worked with in Guyana have risen from a history of something that was near and dear to their heart. Some of our partners are the well-known names. GRPA, Artists in Direct Support, Help and Shelter, Lifeline Counseling Service, Sophia Community Development Center. We have FACT in Borbies. We have United Bricklayers, Hope for All in Regions 2, Hope Foundation in Region 7, Lead and Care Foundation in Region 10, and the list goes on and on.
Quite an extensive.
And that's not all. And I did not want to start calling names because I do not and did not want to invoke any of our NGO partners. I said, well, she fair, but I'm not ready to call us. But we have NGO partners that work across a wide spectrum. And when I said a wide spectrum, so that over 45% of our members work in health-related issues, because most of us have started our work in response to HIV/AIDS pandemic in Guyana in the early 90s, late 90s. And so most of us started our response to HIV. So over 45% of that for the member group works in health-related issues. And so that would be the categorization in terms of the specialties each member bring to that body. But most of it would have started with persons who had a passion for a particular area of focus. Yes,
Right.
Yes.
So what I heard you say is that a non-governmental organization is an organization that is not controlled by government,
Correct.
but it does focus on social issues of national importance. And some of that could include whether it's HIV and AIDS, it could include youth-related issues or environment. All right, so we could say that this is what the NGO is, what it does, and that kind of thing. One of the things that I'm really happy that you mentioned is that these organizations, they stem from a passion.
Correct.
And that is one of the things that I really want us to develop in the conversation, because as you and I would know, it is hard to have something that is sustainable if you're not passionate about it. If you're not passionate about the cause and creating real change, it is hard to get up every morning, go through the rigors, and still come out with resilient and resourceful ideas to combat the issues as we know them. Right?
That is so true.
And one of the things that continues to plague the NGO community is the issue of funding, the issue of sustainability. We hear globally that the pool of donors, the pool of funding continues to shrink. I want us to switch gears just a little bit and talk about sustainability for NGOs. And in talking about that, I want us to explore briefly the idea of social profit and social enterprises.
Sydney, you said something that is key. Passionate and also sustainability. And a lot of times, the idea that NGO work is easy work and NGO work is soft work is very misconstrued. Many NGOs do work and have been working with limited to no resources. And so therefore, your point of sustainability, it's very crucial and it's important. However, we know that many of the NGOs in Guyana, because of that passion and that drive, that's what keeps us going. And what has been missing for a little while was that thinking that your work as an NGO should not be derived from your ability to raise your own finances. And so we have come to learn that is not so. And there's a real place for social enterprising for NGOs. And this is not to say that NGOs have to not look in the direction of donor funding.
Right.
There is a place and will always be a place for donor funding in the work that NGOs do. By the very nature, it's allowing to be able to provide services that many donors across the spectrum might have an interest in seeing that service reach a particular target audience. Now, let's move away from the donor for a bit. What happens to the work of that NGO should they not have a donor at a particular time? And that is where your point of social enterprise becomes very pertinent in this conversation. And so, while it's not something that NGOs were very used to doing, it is relevant now. And the approach that is taken, or the approach in which NGOs are being assisted to take off in terms of this social enterprise and their sustainability, what do you do best? What do you do best as an NGO? And how can you identify? Because many times as NGOs, we do many things. So we might be doing many things. But what is the one thing that your agency is doing that you feel comfortable and competent to be into that social enterprise aspect of it? I know we're using fancy words, social enterprise. All it means in our parallel. How do you raise money? How do you sell your service and get money to keep your organization going? And so it is a process of thinking, what do I do well as an agency? And what aspect of that thing I can now monetize? I can now sell as a service to someone that needs it. Whether that is a consultancy, look within your organization what is scarce. Could you provide consultancy for a particular sector that they can pay you for? Could you provide a very specific services? We know of colleagues who provide services that are aligned with many of the services offered within the public sector, and have those partnerships, whether it is, child services, or whether it is protection of women, whether it's a shelter, whether it is a literacy intervention, that you can now provide this particular service for this sector, and your agency is paid for it. And I want to emphasize, paid for it. Everybody think NGO is supposed to work for free. No, we got bills, we have families, we have needs like every other person that is non-NGO sector.
You mentioned a lot in that bit, but there are a few things that I really want to touch on. One, you mentioned, the social profits and shining examples. We could think about this in France as community developers with what they were able to do with their social enterprise initiative. You mentioned FACT earlier in Berbice. We know that they have an excellent social enterprise initiative with their restaurant. You mentioned the Sapphire Community Development Association. I could think about their Oranduc outlet store.
Correct.
And I was made to understand the National Coordinating Coalition, they too have a social enterprise project. If you could tell us a bit about that before we move forward.
We too have our social enterprise project. And again, we look at what do we have as an entity among our staff and what works well. And what works well for us is providing consultancy service for persons who wish to go through the process of understanding, identifying what do they do best and where do they fit best, should they be desirous of starting their own NGO. And so we provide that as a service where we are paid to provide that service, and have been doing that for many agencies locally, and those who came to us, Ghanaians that reside abroad that want us to start their own agency. And so being able to take them through the process of identifying which option is their best registration option, and then everything else that follows with that. And so we do that as a simple social enterprise.
Excellent. And I'm happy that you mentioned that, because a bit later in the conversation, we're going to be exploring the steps that individuals or organizations can take to register an NGO. The other thing that I really wanted to mention or to touch on based on what you said, in talking about social enterprise, you mentioned ability and you mentioned also capacity, all right? But I wanted to look at that from a different angle. We talk about persons in the NGO community, they should be paid. And we talk also about them delivering specific specific services, technical in many instances. I wanted us to explore the idea or the misconception that in the NGO world, in the NGO community, it's very unskilled or semi-skilled individuals, and there's a lot of voluntary work. You mentioned or you suggested that in this community you could have persons who are very high skilled to professionals working in different capacities. I want you to talk a little bit about that in terms of the competence that is required, not just to set up a social enterprise project, but to deliver the kind of projects and services that NGOs would often deliver for the benefit of the nation, even working with government and international partners.
Yeah. And I'm glad that I'm happy that you raised that. It's just about every NGO, even if, let's just assume, even if the entire staff of that NGO would have came right out of high school, the amount of investment and the years of investment that had gone into individuals in terms of capacity building by the very partners / donors that trusted that agency with the abilities they had at the beginning. And I'm saying, we are assuming, even if everyone had started at high school level, which that do not happen, outside of that academic certification, each NGO would have benefited from years of formal training and capacity building in just about every aspect of governance, both self-governance and agency governance. It would require to be able to get you to that level of discipline, to be able to deliver at a standard and an expectation at which that partner trusts you to deliver. So a lot of the international agencies that have invested in non-governmental organizations in Guyana invested in people as well as process. And so coupled with that, now let us speak to the academia of those individuals. We have in the NGO world, and you and I know this, we have people who are qualified at some of the highest levels that are working in NGOs, academic qualifications, and years of skills building that have been invested into them to be able to deliver whatever service they're delivering, particularly when you are dealing with persons and social issues. You better be able to deal with your own skeletons before trying to fix others.
So true.
Because they will come tumbling out. And so when I say personal investment as well as process investment, we would have benefited from a very high standard and a consistent standard of understanding governance processes and what is required at the highest possible level. Because tell you what, we all know this topic which we are speaking, donor resources. In order for you to be able to access and implement using donor resources, your governance structures better be A1.
And that is a test of capacity and competence.
Thank you. And so it addresses, and I took my time to say that, to address this notion that persons who work at the NGO level may be somehow at some lesser than capacity or capacities. And while we know that is so far from the truth, we also know that a big role and what the things that NGO do is help to build up people.
Yes.
So we, by our nature, will do things and bring into the fold persons, young and old, that may not be deemed competent
Yes.
by other sectors and that might be set aside by other sectors. We invest in those persons, and then you see what they were always capable of. They may not have had the opportunity, but NGOs a lot of time bring into the fold persons and providing that opportunity of growth. And so I think sometimes there is this misconception, that all the NGOs have Tom Jones and Mary Jane and, and so on, that society may deem not worthy. Right, but that is the very nature, and that is the things, and that is what the role of NGOs. And we know and have seen and can attest to how many persons, young and old, would have been given that second, third chance through a non-government organization, and it's doing great for themselves.
Well said. That is a great place to take our first break. And when we come back, we will explore the role that NGOs play in building up the community, in building the nation through their service and through their activities.
That is it.
Welcome back to this episode of DSP. We are speaking with Mistress Simone Sills, and she is dissecting the world of non-governmental organizations. We have talked about what an NGO is. We've also discussed a lot about social enterprises and sustainability of these organizations. We touched briefly in the last segment about the role that NGOs play in development. We have touched on it from the individual level. But in this segment, I want us to really explore the role that NGOs play in development at the community level and at the national level.
Like we were saying, the investment in the individual has a direct correlation and spill-off to what we see in our communities and what we see at the national level.
Yes.
If I can take you a bit to a project that we are currently doing in the community where the NGOs embedded. So we have been engaging a group of youngsters ages 6 to 16 years old, both in and out of school. And one of the things that we have noted from our journey of interaction, so as an individual, from the individual level, people consider me to be a mellow person. And so here it was, and dealing with a group of youngsters, high energy, lots to say, lots of opinions, but also with lots of facts that are missing from what they believe. And it goes to show one person, the impact they can have on so many.
Yes.
And I take this route, it seemed a little lengthy to share this. So we started working with this group of young people. Just over a year ago, we started working with them in a very strategic manner. We've been working with them for 3 years, on and off. It is absolutely amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Over the past year, this group of youngsters, we were very intentional,
Yes.
in exposing them to things that they would not otherwise have had the opportunity to be exposed to. See, it warms your heart. It warms your heart to see, with no big stick method, just by having these youngsters have the opportunity to be able to do things or participate in things they thought was beyond their reach. The personal changes,
Yes.
in attitude and everything. And that is just them doing that on their own. And I think it's important for us to understand, hence I shared that experience, it is important for us to understand that when you invest in a person, an individual, you're investing in a family, you're investing in a community, you're investing in our national development. And so it's my belief as an educator, as someone that is passionate about human development, I believe before anything, you need to understand and help people to understand they are valued and valuable, regardless of where they are, regardless of where they are. And for me, that is what gets me out of the bed in the morning, seeing, and I don't think a lot of people really understand, just by being there and showing up for people in a way that they do not expect anyone to show up for them makes a difference. I have a mentor, an amazing woman, from since I was a young woman growing up and getting into this work. And there's one thing that always comes to mind that she said to me, and it's stuck with me for years. Before you condemn, or when you see a youngster behaving in a way that society deem outside of the norm, before that young person gets to that stage, you would have had to have at least 2 adults who failed them.
Wow.
At least 2.
Wow.
The mother, the father, and the list continues. Let's say your mother and father fail you. You would have had to have a teacher. You would have had to have a neighbor. You would have had to interact with someone in your community that was older than you at some point before you meet to this point that society now deemed you to be not so valuable to society anymore. So before we as adults start condemning, we need to ask ourselves, did we have an opportunity to intervene, and have we intervened? And so that is my approach every day I wake up. And so that's the approach I take to my work. And so therefore, the youngsters that I interact with in the community where we reside as an NGO, man, I get in love left, right, and center from people who other adults who's like, even their parents come to say, I don't know what you're doing, but you keep doing it.
Awesome.
But is that investment in a person? And on the hands, it doesn't take a whole lot.
Yeah.
How do you value that person? And so therefore, NGOs have a role.
Yes.
NGOs have a role in society in helping particularly to steer, nurture, and bring to the surface talents that are hidden, that are dormant behind a lot of hurt, behind a lot of abuse, behind a lot of neglect, and the list go on and on. So you see we have a whole lot of resources in a lot of youngsters that are not being utilized in the ways they could be utilized because of what they would have experienced at a very young stage and age of their life. And then they continue to get more neglect and, and that kind of stuff. So there's a role for NGOs. That is what a lot of us do, and that's what a lot of us continue to do.
On this platform, it has been established that one of the roles that NGOs play, especially at the national level, is holding government accountable, especially as it prioritizes funding. We know that Guyana, we're receiving massive amount of funding due to oil and gas exploration and some of the other industries. NGOs, they play a role in prioritizing where these resources go. What are some of the issues that gets funding? Tell us a bit more, in your estimation, about the role that NGOs play at a national level, especially in terms of influencing policy.
So you're taking me down to a policy discussion that's deep. Now, specifically as to the role, if we're going to be frank in this discussion, as the NGOs play in that right now, has to do with what are those guardrails and bodies that are set up to have oversight and who is part of, who was a representation
Yes.
on those different committees or whatever it is called. And if we're going to talk influence and participation, it will be expected that at that level of policy influence and oversight, representation should be there for persons from all groups and categories. I am not aware that that is so as we sit now. So if you were to say, what is the position of NGOs, I feel as though we don't have any. And that is my view. We have, if I remember this correctly, there are committees that are set up around the management, specifically of the question that is posed to me in terms of revenues that, is coming in now from a stream that we didn't have revenues before, the oil and gas sector. The National Resource Fund Oversight Committee, if that is the correct term for what it is called. I am not aware that at that level, and if we're talking about meaningful engagement, I'm not talking tokenism. There's a thin line between tokenism and involvement. I don't know, and I'm not aware that at that level there is civil society representation that is chosen by civil society. And I also want to take this opportunity to specify, because you can very well someone goes, private sector is a form of civil society. I am talking about civil society that deals with the social sector. I usually joke and say when it comes to money in this country, particularly monies that are assigned from the administrations at the administrative country level, civil society NGOs like us are treated like the stepsisters, the stepbrothers. Private sector usually is always considered as a civil society sector that is ready and always looked at when it comes to a position of influence and a position of say-so. Which burns my heart, because the collective of the NGOs that we are involved with serve collectively over 5,000 Guineans. And so it may seem a small number, but it is, for the most part, it is a number and represents a portion of people with less influence that do not have a platform outside of the NGOs to have a say-so.
When you mentioned 5,000 that is being serviced, this is specifically talking about the 40 NGOs that are registered in your network.
Yeah.
But when we think about the many NGOs that are registered across the nation, we could see how that number multiplies and it expands tremendously. So that the NGO sector is definitely one that is influential and has a lot of say-so, like you mentioned. And I'm happy that you brought up the issues that you mentioned in terms of NGO representatives sitting on these oversight committee, because one of the objectives of the development space is to interrogate existing policy and to really advocate for reformation and, in some instances, drafting new policies that creates and brings about sustainable development. So this is an excellent place to switch gears. We've talked about the importance that NGOs play, not only at the community level, but also at the national level. We've touched a bit about sustainability and social enterprise.
Yeah.
We've even discussed what NGOs are. In our introduction, we did say that we're going to come and we're going to share with our audience the steps to register an NGO. Somebody might be looking at this episode and they're excited about all of these benefits that NGOs bring to a country, and they want to start one of their own. Tell us, what are the steps? Walk us through.
There is, Sydney, the unfortunate thing is there's no specific NGO legislation in Guyana. So there's no if you are at home, you're sitting, you're thinking, okay, let's open an NGO. I cannot say to you, based on NGO legislation X, Y, and Z, here are the steps. What we have is a menu of options that are available if you'd like to register your startup to work in a civic space in terms of a non-governmental organization. And the menu of options you have, you can either register under the Friendly Societies Act, you can register as a trust deed. As a trust deed, you can register as what you call not a full-fledged business, but you also have an option where you can register an unlimited company. And it all depends on what you would like to do, how you would like to function. And so usually when people come to us, because we provide that as a service for persons, if a person were to come to us and say, I'd like to register NGO, one of the questions we ask is, tell us what is your best way of functioning and how do you see yourself functioning? And given that, we lay out for our persons, this is your list of options in terms of registering to work in this space. You need to now go back, have a discussion with your group members, given what you would have seen based on your options, which is the best option for you. And that is only because there's no specific NGO legislation. So you choose based on what is as is guided in those options and what you think would best suit your need.
As we wrap up this episode, I'll give you the opportunity to give a word of encouragement to our listening audience. We have said a lot, but what are the final words that you want to leave with our audience today?
One of the things I'd like to say, if you have something that is burning in your hand, the thing that you wake up and think of in the morning, maybe that's the thing you need to be working on. I'm not saying everyone should go out and open an NGO, but there are people who have passions that is well aligned and fitted for this kind of community service and social service. If you feel that, then there's a space for you in the civic NGO space. It's a lot of commitment. It's a lot of work. So you need to be passionate about it, but it's beautiful work. You get to change lives, you get to impact people positively.
Awesome. And if you do want to start an NGO, you want to register an NGO, I would encourage you to reach out to the National Coordinating Coalition. You could find them on Facebook, and
we're also on Twitter and on our website at nccgy.org.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Development Space Podcast.